In 1963, Katharine Graham took over as the head of the Washington Post. She was 46 years old and had spent the previous 20 years raising children. In her memoirs, she described herself as a doormat wife and that she knew nothing about business when she took over. In fact, she was really scared that she would destroy the company and the newspaper that her father had built.
I felt desperate and secretly wondered if I might have blown the whole thing and lost the paper.
Fortunately, what she had going for her was that she was a good judge of character. When a mysterious, then relatively unknown investor by the name of Warren Buffett started buying shares of her company, she met him, thought that he was a good person, and invited him onto her board. Warren Buffett, of course, is today known as one of the greatest investors of all time. But at the time, he was just some person from Omaha that not many people had heard of. When he joined the board, Buffett took it on himself to teach Katharine Graham business. And he did this in a very particular way.
And so all of a sudden, here she is, and she had an all-male board that was waiting for her, and all they wanted was her to stay home and cash the dividend checks.
You see, what Buffett would do was that he would come to Washington, D.C. on a regular schedule for his board duties. And each time he came, he would bring with him a few annual reports. Think of them as financial statements of companies. It might not just be the annual reports, it might also be the 10K filings. But the point was that he would bring a number of annual reports about a number of companies, and then he would go and walk Katharine Graham through the reports with a pencil. He told her that just as some folks collected antique cars, he himself collected antique financial statements. He said, and I quote, "Just as with geography or humans, it is interesting to take a snapshot of a business at widely different points in time and reflect on what factors produced change as well as what differentiates the specific pattern of development from others also observed." Now, I want you to notice two things. First, that Warren Buffett had a collection of antique financial statements. The fact that he could bring specific ones with him to illustrate certain business concepts meant that he had organized these financial statements according to various business concepts, even if it was just in his head. The second thing I want you to notice is how he was teaching Katharine Graham. He was doing it by way of constant case comparisons, right? Look at this business, he would say. Look at how healthy it is in such and such a year. And then let's take a look at how it's doing 10 years later. And it turns out that it's not doing very well. Why? Now compare that with another company, company B perhaps, and then we compare with it, 10 years later, and it's doing much better. Why? What are the differences? What are the causes? Right? And he did this again and again for different businesses across time because he had many financial reports. He'd been collecting them for many, many decades. As time passed, Katharine Graham came to know business, and eventually she became one of the greats. Over the course of her tenure, which was 28 years, the Post company's compound annual return to shareholders was 22.3%, outperforming the S&P by 18-fold and her peers by 6-fold. The way she did this was that she took the cash generated by the Washington Post and used it to buy other good companies. And how did she know what a good company looked like? How did she know what to aim for? Well, it was all thanks to Buffett. Now, the way that Buffett taught Katharine Graham is basically the calibration case method in a nutshell. And as it turns out, it was the same way that he, meaning Buffett himself, constantly improved in business and investing. Now, the good news is that we can copy this method for ourselves. So what exactly is the calibration case method? The calibration case method is a name that we at Commoncog use to describe this style of learning. The method is basically two things, right? The first thing is that you want to collect at least 10 cases for each concept that you'd like to understand. And the second thing is that you should do case comparisons against other cases that you already know when you encounter a new case. And when you do those case comparisons, you should ask two questions. So let's examine these two things in order. First, you want to seek out multiple cases for each business concept you like to understand, right? So in business, there are concepts. There could be a concept like a good business with a competitive advantage that is durable. But each case that you seek out as an example or an instantiation of that concept should be different from each other. In other words, when you're looking for these concepts, and these are 10 cases, 10 different companies, right? You should reason to yourself, this is one way that this particular business concept, which is like a durable competitive advantage, can show up. And for each concept, you really want to do a minimum of 10 different cases, but really you want to do this for as many cases and as many concepts as possible for as long as you're alive. The second thing you want to do is that every time you encounter a new case, whether it's by experience, whether it's you're reading a biography or reading an annual report like Warren Buffett, you want to ask two questions. And the two questions are, what are some surprising similarities with other cases, other businesses, other examples that I know? And what are some surprising dissimilarities? These two questions are what the experts actually ask whenever they're making sense of their experiences, whenever they're looking at a new case. Now, at this point in the video, you actually already know enough to use this method to improve yourself. You can just apply this method to improving in business, improving in investing. But if you want to know why this case method works, give me 5 more minutes. The calibration case method happens to be the result of some smart research that's been used by the US military to accelerate expertise. This is a 2016 book that summarizes what they've done, but basically it just means that they've used this work, and in particular, this theory, cognitive flexibility theory, right? I'm not going to talk about it, but you can go and Google about it. They use this theory and this work to help create training programs to make soldiers better, faster. And you can also find a summary of this theory in the Oxford Handbook of Expertise, which is this very expensive, very big book that sort of summarizes this theory in a very short number of pages. Why does the case method work? The reason it works has to do with the kind of domain that business and investing is. What business and investing is something that these researchers call an ill-structured domain. And as you might imagine, war happens to also be an ill-structured domain. An ill-structured domain is a domain where there are concepts like competitive advantage, intrinsic value, turnarounds, good turnarounds, bad turnarounds, right? But the way these concepts show up in the real world are highly variable and unique. That means that every case that you deal with is going to be different. As you are watching this, I guarantee you that you're familiar with some ill-structured domains already, which means you know why it can be difficult to learn in these domains. Think about the way you learn to get along with and understand people. Every person you meet is unique, but we can still describe people using various conceptual categories. People can be loud, they can be quiet, people can be outgoing, or they can be shy. But even so, every shy person is unique, and sometimes they can be very different from each other, right? For instance, look at Katharine Graham and Warren Buffett. Both of them have said that they are shy people, and they have been described by others as shy people. But one of them hosts many social events in Washington, D.C., and the other can speak in front of thousands of people in Berkshire Hathaway's annual shareholder meetings. If you're teaching a child what shyness is, it's not enough to just provide them with a description of shyness. You must also let them meet and interact with shy people in the real world. As they grow older and meet more people, their understanding of shyness and other personality traits, to be clear, will deepen because they will have more examples of shy people to calibrate on. And so it is with business. So yes, I know this might seem like a little contrived as an example because most of us have forgotten what it's like to be a child who doesn't know what shyness is. But let's use a more adult example. Let's say that you're a clinical psychologist. This is a screen cap from Mindhunter, a series on Netflix. It's not just enough to read descriptions of a psychopath from a psych textbook. To be an effective clinical psychologist, you must interact with real psychopaths to get a proper understanding of what a psychopath can look like and act like. And you must meet more than one because no two psychopaths are exactly alike. If you think about it, this is a little odd. Why must we learn in this way? The answer again lies with the domain. When researchers look at ill-structured domains, they found that, first of all, novices find it really hard to go from concept description to real-world case because there's too much novelty in the real-world cases, right? They're just too different from each other. Secondly, they tend to cling to just one or two examples and they over-fixate on it, right? Making them unable to handle the true novelty of the domain. Again, businesses are always different. Always, industries are different, technology changes are different, competitive market structures are different. And so you need to have a loose hold on what these concepts can look like when you're looking at them in the real world, right? And in fact, when the researchers examine what the experts themselves in these domains do, they found that these experts do not actually reason from concept description or from framework. It's too difficult. Instead, what they do is they reason by comparing against other cases that they know. Let's talk about that last point a bit more, right? So we can tell that Warren Buffett taught Catherine Graham partly because this was the way that he taught. But what Warren Buffett himself does is not surprising at all to these expertise researchers. When these researchers studied experts in ill-structured domains, they found that experts do two things differently from novices. The first thing is that they do rapid case comparisons with fragments of other cases that they've seen before. Notice how they're not going back to the framework, they're not over-indexing on just one or two examples. And secondly, they do not assume that there is a simple explanation for any case in their domain. If you compare this with what novices do, as we mentioned earlier, novices index too hard on one or two examples and they try to cling too hard to the conceptual explanation. Or in the case of business, MBA students, they love frameworks. But experts don't cling too tightly to the frameworks. And the second thing that novices do is that they constantly, they do not seek out new cases or new ways to explain old cases that they already know. You compare this with what experts do, experts are willing to let go or update the framework. Their worldview, their stance is that the case is more important than the framework because the case is where you get to feel the novelty of the domain. And secondly, experts are forever, for their entire lives, even when they're really old and really experienced, they're always seeking new cases because causes in their domain are complex and they will always find something new. Even if they're really old, like Warren Buffett, even though Warren Buffett has seen many decades of business, he never assumes that he has seen it all. So now you understand why calibration cases work. They help you make sense of and pattern match in an ill-structured domain, and business and investing is an ill-structured domain. And you can perhaps see why Warren Buffett taught K. Graham in that particular way. Now, the calibration case method is something that Commoncog is built around. Commoncog is a media site. We do a very specific service for you. Warren Buffett had built a case library of annual reports, right, that he could draw on when he was teaching Catherine Graham. Wouldn't it be nice if you had access to a similar case library, one that you didn't have to build yourself? Well, that's what we've built at Commoncog, right? We've built a case library of business situations to teach you to improve your pattern matching. The case library is constantly growing, we're constantly improving it, and we're publishing new pieces every week to help you make sense of various business situations that we point out in the case library. If you're interested, go to commoncog.com and sign up for our newsletter or check out the case library today. Hope this was helpful. Thank you for watching.